What's up, YouTubers? It's me, Johnny. Today I'm sitting outside in the sun. Not sure how this is going to come out, but earlier I made a video on the earthquake that just happened here. And thanks for all the comments. And a shout out to all the people in Florida. I was just thinking about the hurricanes there. When I used to live in Manila, I lived on the outskirts of Manila in some of the nicer developments there. Mainly because it's slightly out of the hurricane. In the Philippines, they have hurricane areas and ranges. Like the further you can get away from certain zones, the hurricanes are less for when they do come. So consequently, the nicer developments, they develop out there. And incidentally, while I'm talking about it, when you go out to those nicer areas, developments, they have their own water resources. I only mention that because in the Philippines, the water supply, there's shortages of water there. And the way banking and insurance works in the Philippines is, if I'm talking legitimate builders, if you're a legitimate builder out there, you have to build in areas where there's a water supply and where you can put in proper infrastructure and stuff like that's really important if you're going to live there, because that means you always have water supply. Well, not always, but I always did. But that means you have your own private wells. They've developed everything so the wells are deep enough to get water. And you don't have to worry about other parts of the Philippines where you have to have water shipped into you by truck. So if you live in some, well, I don't want to say ghetto, but if you live in some of the other areas that are less developed, when the water goes off or there's a shortage of water, you have to rely on the trucks to come in to deliver water to you, which in my case it never really happened to me. But when I first went to the Philippines, I lived kind of near a little shanty town, but kind of on the edge of it. And I just know that from kind of living there closer to the shanty town, they had to, well, it's another story. But anyways, certain areas in the Philippines, if you live in, you have to have private, well, you don't have to, you should live in areas with private wells so you never run out of water. The only time they ever shut the water down is to clean out the wells, or clean out how the wells work and how they deliver the water, all that. They do that pretty infrequently there, from what I remember. Anyways, I'm just recalling all that because when I used to live there, I lived out of the worst part of the hurricane zone, which, let me think now, I think I lived in the north of the city, not the south. And because I lived there, it was better, but whenever you want to take a bus or drive, you have to go across all that traffic if you're going south to the beaches, because there's nicer beaches to the north too, but always think about that if you can live in a big city like Manila, which side of the city you're going to live on. Make sure you live in a nice area that has your own private wells and nice resorts you can go to where it's only a couple hours away either by bus or by a private car if you have a car there. Anyways, I was just reading one of the comments about the hurricanes in Florida. That got me thinking about, there was one time when there's a hurricane, and I was so happy and so glad I lived in a more developed area where the homes are built properly for that kind of thing. So when all the winds came in, the roof didn't go flying off. The trees bent down like you see in the movies or in the newsreels. The trees bent down, bedded down. It's like a river running down my street. Stuff like that. But other than that, I was safe and fine. But these are the things that can happen to you when you live in the Philippines or in Central or South America. There's these natural disasters, and you have to plan and think about it before you move to a certain area and know, do you live high enough for if there's flooding? That's really important in the Philippines. I would say it's even important here too, but less so. I live more in the mountains where there's not a problem with flooding, but if you live in other parts of Guatemala, that might be a concern. But if you don't consider these things, you'll learn about it pretty fast when you rent apartments there, because your apartment will get flooded out. You'll notice the other side of the street is higher up in elevation so they don't get flooded out. That's how I learned. Anyways, these natural disasters, they happen. You just have to deal with them and not let them get in the way of your lifestyle. And then kind of learn to deal with what you can personally deal with. If there's certain deal breakers you can't deal with, I would suggest moving somewhere else in the country or to an adjacent country where things will be more to your liking. And most of the time, living in the more developed areas solves most of these problems, because the way the developers have to build, like in the Philippines, they have to get bank financing, which means they have to get insurance to cover anything that might go wrong. So they have to somewhat follow the rules. I say somewhat, but mostly follow the rules. And if it's an international development and it's American or European banks financing it, then they always, well, I don't want to say always, but my understanding, they always follow the rules. So everything will be properly built for like earthquakes, hurricanes, all that kind of stuff. So it's as safe as it can be. Infrastructure will be put in a way that you can get in and out of the city really much easier, and get around to local stuff much easier. People don't think about that, but in these lesser developed areas, when they're building, when an outside entity comes in and builds, they have to build by the first world standards typically, else they can't get financing and insurance to do the deal or the project. So they build everything, so grocery stores, infrastructures around the developments all laid out nicely so you can get to it. All I can add is just make sure you live on the right, make sure you consider which part of the city you want to live on, like for when you want to go out of town, because like if you, like down here in Guatemala, it's used cars are pretty cheap, brand new cars are pretty cheap compared to other parts of Latin America. So you very likely will have a used car. So you got to consider, you know, the traffic, and if it is bad, what you can do is just when you're leaving town to go to the beach or whatever, or to go to the mountains or wherever you're going, or going down to El Salvador, just make sure you can kind of leave when the traffic's not so bad. In that sense, it's not too bad. But in Manila, traffic was just bad all the time, and you could be in a bus for 2 hours, you could be in your car for 2 hours, and barely move. I mean, I've never seen traffic as bad as it is in Manila. And when I left there, San Miguel, or San Miguel Beer, the big company that owns San Miguel Beer, they raised a couple $2 billion in debt offerings. They did a few share offerings for a couple billion. So basically $4 billion USD just to try to develop better infrastructure there. And even though $4 billion sounds like a lot, that barely put a dent, I'm sure, into making the roads better. Because when I left there, I think it was the average miles per hour you could go there was 30 miles in certain parts of the city, and they were doing studies that suggest if they don't do anything right now, it could get down to 10 or 15 miles an hour. That is why there's not a lot of development as far as offshore companies coming in to build stuff and ship it out, because the infrastructure there is so bad. And if you put it in Manila, or if you put it in Cebu, those places are so messed up, it's hard to work around those problems. That's why a lot more development goes into the other parts of Southeast Asia. Anyways, even though with all those problems, the Philippines is still, I mean, for me anyways, a cool place to live or visit or whatever, if you choose that part of the world. But of course, there's Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Myanmar or Burma, all kinds of cool places out there. And when you're out there, you can get a one-way ticket for $50 to $100 to fly to an adjacent country, or from capital to capital for $50 to $100. You can just fly it on the weekend, get a $200 or $300 package, get a hotel and flight, return flight, all that, and just see some of the surrounding areas. That can be kind of cool. Anyways, that's it for now. I just wanted to put this video out, see how it would work out if I sat outside. Doesn't seem too bad, but I can't always get the sun to be the right way, so the sun's not always in my eyes. Anyways, like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment.